I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Marco Antonio Lozano Melino. I'm the coordinator of the services Protege tu Empresa, Protect Your Company at INCIBE, the Spanish National Cybersecurity Institute. And in this session, we're going to be talking about how cybersecurity is no longer an option for companies. We have companies with high technology dependence and with low technology dependence, but we believe cybersecurity is not an option for anybody. We're going to talk about the threats that affect SMEs and micro companies with lower technological maturity, what tools we can use to protect ourselves, and how easy it is to deceive businessmen and entrepreneurs. It's true that we're here in a room, only a few of us. Can you give me your credit cards? And can you show me a credit card? Wonderful. It's an anti-RF sleeve. Can you tell me your PIN number? The PIN number? Have you seen what I've just done? You can cut this. Don't worry, it's okay. What I've just done is what cybercriminals try to do with us. Try to gain our trust in order to try to do something. And the remaining two, one is sitting back. Can you exchange your mobile phones? Well, sit up front, because it's just the three of you. I don't know if you're three privileged men, but there are other parallel sessions. If you could please exchange your mobile phones. Wonderful. And regardless of what you're feeling, try to unblock your mobiles. Try to unblock them, as you know, based on your knowledge. See if you're capable of unblocking. Don't exceed yourself in the attempts in order not to block smartphones. Have you been able to unblock the smartphones? No. Wonderful. You can return your mobile phones to the owners. It's just a few of us, but we know more about cybersecurity and we apply more cybersecurity than we may think or expect. Why? Because with the exception of our colleague, you've trusted me, I'm very persuasive. But you've got your mobiles blocked, and we know more about cybersecurity than we believe. And problem is that cybersecurity is not subject matter that is discussed with colleagues. If, for example, we have a colleague that doesn't have code to access his mobile phone, we don't ask that colleague or that friend why they don't block their mobiles with a code. Some of us do integrate cybersecurity practices, others not. And it's very important that we apply this to our personal field or domain and also in the professional domain as well. I always like to begin my presentation by saying how security was 25 years ago, 25 to 30 years ago, what the typical criminal was 25 to 30 years ago. We're talking about someone who had to physically go to the place where he or she wanted to perpetrate the attack. And the headlines back then were of this nature. A person is kidnapped, a bank is robbed, jewelry store, and 30 years later, the profile of criminals has changed, and we see that now we're talking about cyber criminals. Now we're talking about a completely different scenario and environment. Cyber criminals operate globally. They attack using the internet, and now we're not talking about criminals, but cyber criminals, and they use all the technologies and services provided by the internet in order to make the most of it, in order to perpetrate their misdeeds. What headlines can we find 30 years later? An IT attack paralyzes any pictures, a pirate. What we see is that in 2017, there have been many attacks. How could you summarize 2017? What, in your opinion, is the number one malware? What has been the number one attack in 2017? You're saying that we used to have cyber criminals, but in the past you were infected with viruses. But in the year 97, it wasn't common to see fraudulent money transfers. I mean, this happened, but it wasn't as common. But now what we see is that this is common practice. It's very easy to have your money stolen, to have your credentials or personal data stolen. And here you can see the evolution of security across time for the different ICTs. In the 70s, we have computers, information systems. In the 80s, we see technologies, and the landscape becomes more complex. In the 90s, we see the emergence of the internet, and this was a game changer. In the year 2000, social media, mobile devices, one can connect to the internet from a very small device. Then we have the cloud, a new paradigm, a yet new paradigm that is a breeding ground for cyber criminals, cybercrime. And now we're talking about the Internet of Things and the Internet of, chunk even. And it's probable that in this new landscape there is a further insecurity. I don't know if you've used IoT devices. This morning, when making this presentation, I pointed at those lamps that you can connect via Wi-Fi. You can dim the lights through your smartphone. I'm talking about domotics. But it's not just about controlling, for example, heaters, because that technology is a bit more consolidated. But those lamps are connected to our Wi-Fi network. You can manage them from our application. That's it. But do we really know whether that app, that firmware, or that light bulb is properly secured in order not to compromise the Wi-Fi network? What we want to make sure is that we can manage the parameters of the light bulb through an app. The manufacturer perhaps establishes that some passwords need to be used, and what we see is that usability prevails over security in this case. Sorry, the comments are being made off mic, so we can't interpret them. Yes, as the user was saying, usability it prevails over security. What's the motivation behind IT attacks and attacks against companies? What's the reason behind this? The number one goal. Well, money. Making money. Of course, that's the reason behind these attacks. If you do industrial espionage, if you sell a stolen patent, you do so to make big bucks. But cybercrime currently accounts for 0.8% of world GDP, global GDP. This is much more than the money generated by human trafficking and drug smuggling. For you to understand the dimension, there's a company that is an exception. Do you think that's the case? That's the question I pose to you, because small companies believe that they cannot be subject to the attacks of cyber criminals. They believe that this kind of attacks only affect big corporations, but that's not true. It's true that big corporations are more technologically mature and are more protected because their most important asset, i.e., information, is more protected. But companies with a lower degree of technological maturity will not implement sufficient protective measures to protect their info and will be an easier target for these cyber criminals. So all companies, big or small, are a target, a potential target for cyber criminals. But should I implement cybersecurity measures in my company? The answer is very straightforward. In these days, there are no companies with projects that don't involve services published on the internet or used to communicate with the administration. There's always something that involves ICTs. In the past, we printed documents and would then take hard copies. But now the situation has changed. That is why it is of utmost importance to implement cybersecurity measures in companies. We're aware of the main risks that affect companies. What, in your opinion, can be major risk to which companies are exposed? Yes, I agree. Ransomware, phishing, viruses. You've mentioned many threats, so you also have flooding or fires. Those are also risks, but the most important risk is not having access to our business's info for the reasons you've mentioned. I would like to underline the good name or reputation of companies, because if our company suffers an incident that affects customer data or makes public some data that will be published and that will challenge our good name and put it into question. Well, if that's the case, we will lose the trust of our customers. In the United States, for you to understand, this is considered to be good name, the most valuable intangible asset. I'm going to run over the problems you've mentioned. We have first the hardware problems due to inadequate handling. And let me give you an example for you to understand. Someone that is trying to break in our office, or maybe the cleaning staff that unplug a cable or turn off a switch, or other cases, for example, when children visit an office and touch something or turn off equipment. That would be a form of, or an example of hardware problem caused by mishandling. And then we have the unhappy or dissatisfied employees or insiders. Insiders can pose a major threat to companies. Why? Because since these people have worked in the company, they can have access to information, make it public, sell it. Let's imagine a company that has under-the-table activities, and this insider gains access to this information and makes it public. Well, of course, this is a threat to the good name of the company. We'll talk about that later. Now, there are many companies that are working hard to develop apps that can detect insiders within organizations with the goal of identifying them and doing a psychological profiling in order to try to implement the appropriate measures for those insiders not to be able to access that information, or implement policies to prevent staff from accessing files, or from extracting info from USB drives or other devices. And then we have other problems that affect companies that are well known. The famous vulnerabilities, WannaCry ransomware was due to a vulnerability in the Windows operating system that wasn't properly patched. And I'm saying appropriately because the patch existed, but it wasn't good enough. So, for the Apple, I think that there's no patch, or perhaps the new version, the update is already available. But in the case of Microsoft, the vulnerability was corrected in March, but the ransomware appeared in May. So, had all the companies updated their apps and tested them well, probably this year we wouldn't have heard anything related to WannaCry or Petya, and probably many of the ransomwares wouldn't have appeared. We have the typical viruses, the typical malware, and ransomware's a type of malware, and then we have impersonation in different contexts. For example, celebrities, when they say something in the social media, often say that their accounts have been hacked when they are quoted and they don't like that. And then we have industrial espionage or targeted attacks. We know that this is quite common. We see that companies whose competitors are eating up their piece of the cake, are trying to steal their patents, push them out of the market. For example, Black Friday. Let me give you this example. We have the denial of service attacks, and you know that these DOS have to do with trying to attack a web service to render it inoperable. And it would be possible to hire DOS service because cybercrime exists as a service. We can hire cybercrime services, believe it or not. There's a website that sells electronic services on Black Friday, let's imagine, and then we have another website that sells the same, and we want this other company to render the first company inoperable so that the potential customers can be redirected to this second malicious website, so that during 12 hours the first company's website is crashed and potential customers purchase in the other website. We have this kind of attacks, targeted attacks, that are much more complex threats, the design of which is more complicated. Sometimes it takes months or even years, but they're target, or their goal is to steal highly confidential government information at times, and these are often highly sophisticated attacks. But now, for a video, let me try to convey to you what happens in the minds of cyber criminals. I can still remember when I had to wait until the end of the working day to be in a position of breaking in and stealing money, computers, and company information. But since I started stealing through the internet, it's much easier to steal corporate info. And the good thing is that many companies don't even detect my attacks. Do you know how I break into the internet? Well, you'd be surprised with how much information is out there and how easy it is to infect computers in unprotected companies. Sometimes it's as easy as an email with an attached virus. Once installed, I can install Trojans or steal information and resell it. And as you all know, installing an antivirus is very simple. I don't even have to, redouble my efforts. I just need to go and find an unwary person who is willing to click on a link to execute a file, or having that person introduce his credentials in a fake email address that I sent via email. And the fact that people are not aware of the importance of cybersecurity plays to my benefit. Many times they install apps on their website. They expose them to the internet without realizing that they need to implement patches and update them, change the password and the directory of the settings files. Thanks to that clumsiness, I can break into their premises, virtual premises. And I love it when people contact me because they want me to spy on their lover's mobile phone, or they ask me to steal data. I review the info on caches and even personal pictures. And I wouldn't be able to do this if users would use access keys. When I go to a hotel, I start stealing Wi-Fi connections. I'm able to collect all the data transferred by these people. You probably don't know how fun it is to access to these networks, open networks. I love it when they ask me to steal confidential data from companies. I call and I tell them that I'm an IT technician that works for the companies, and sometimes they even give me their username and passwords and let me tinker with their computers while I'll enjoy a cup of coffee. Didn't they explain to them that passwords are personal and non-transferable? Some people believe that 6 consecutive letters in the keyboard are good passwords, but I have tools in order to test thousands of passwords per session. Should they know that, they would use longer keywords that would include uppercase, lowercase, symbols, and numbers. And the internet is a great space for us thanks to those bold and unwary users, thanks to those companies that are not concerned about their cybersecurity and that aren't even considering the need to implement measures. We're getting wealthy and filling our pockets thanks to them.
Como habéis visto, o sea, se pueden hacer muchísimas cosas que podrían.
As you can see, many things can be done that can harm and damage companies. What do cybercriminals do? On the one hand, they work on what affects people, basically social engineering, which is what I did with you with a credit card, try to convince you so that you can give me something in exchange. And urgency.
As motivation, so users do not have time to think or to react whether I have to reply to this. Those are the typical phishing warning messages. If you don't introduce this information in 24 hours, you will run out of time. So the defacement and some other actions that end up in a possible problem. Then we have systems and architectures that support technology, stolen cards, information, failure management when applications are not rightly settled, ransomware, and some other vulnerabilities that affect web servers, etc. I'm just going to give you a few examples. Maria's story, where they use as the attack line social engineering and spy phishing. spear phishing, I'm sorry, and basically is defacement and phishing. Maria's employee, Alexandra, got an email from somebody that was speaking on behalf of the ski instructor of her child's school with an attached document that was infected. This person, the cybercriminal, before sending the email, had to do a research so that all information was coherent, and this person might end up in the trick, basically a research on social media. In this case, it was Alexandra, but it could have been anybody in the company to see whether she had a child that was having ski lessons, etc. And this is what we do. We publish our information in the media, in the social media. This PDF and the information was coherent, and Alexandra's timetable was the right one, so that this person could see that there was not a change and could forget about the email. But Maria's IT department sent a message saying something had happened in the website. The website had been committed. When Maria accesses her website, usually the search engines have a system to detect whether the website had been impersonated or not. There is a warning in Chrome is red X, and when she accessed her website, the surprise was that it was being used to sell falsified shoes. So you can see now how the cyber criminals changed and modified Maria's website. Can you think about the way they managed? How cyber criminals attacking Alexandra were able to corrupt Maria's website. Sorry, we're not getting the replies because the audience is not using the microphone. The server is in a hosting far away, so the key is the following. Alexandra was managing the web contents. The cyber criminals had the passwords and the ID, and they could upload the website with whatever information they wanted. What are the most serious cases? Jose's story, and they are real cases. What we call the whaling phishing is for small users, and whaling is let us try to get the money of a big wig here. What they use is something very similar to the previous example, social engineering with impersonation. How do they get it? They use email because it's the most economical and easy system or channel, and because email is something that was born without the need for security. So what they try to do in this case is to contact somebody at the management level in the company, indicating that they want to carry out a very good financial transaction, speaking about the need to keep the secret, so that this person ends up doing the money transfer. Then we have the story of the ransomware, somebody that gets an invoice from a utility or tax authorities at the postal services. We click on the attached file and the device is infected and files are ciphered. You know what happens. We see it in the news. The device is blocked, and what is interesting is that they request a sum of money to rescue the files. In the past, a few years ago, we didn't need this urgency. Now all ransomware include a countdown to urge the users to pay before the end of the deadline, otherwise they would lose the files. So we always advise not to access to this blackmail, otherwise this business line used by cybercriminals is going to be a never-ending story. So you should never pay. There are samples of malicious applications with those features that within their code they do not have the recovery of capability. So the payment will never secure that we recoup our files or the end of the blackmail. So that you see how cybercriminals can compile our own information. You know that search engines compile our information from all websites. Then they compile information that was indexed in the documents, and at present they can index metadata hidden in the document. This information, those metadata, are referred to the software related to the Word or Excel file or the user to generate the document and some other information. In this case, because the attack is usually carried out through email, let us see how long does it take to a cybercriminal to compile information related to the email that are published in internet. I can do it with any of your companies if you have information. This is not too damaging or too risky. I'm going to use CyberCamp. Looking for 100 results. What I'm doing here, based on a domain, do a search of all associated email. I can do it on this domain or on thousands and thousands of domains. I can do not only this, it will be more appropriate to use it for a targeted attack. If I want to send a massive attack, I might use any of an internet database and use them to send spam. You can see that here I already have different emails related to this event. If I wanted to do a targeted attack, it would be easy. That's a rather simple part. Let us be now more sophisticated and try to design a phishing where we can steal Facebook ID from a user. This is just for you to see how long does it take to set a malicious server and carry out an attack. I already have a virtual machine that is going to be the malicious server. It's going to be a social engineering attack vector the web. I will capture the ID, so I write the malicious server address. Now, what is the site I want to clone? In this case is Facebook, and I already have the malicious server. Now I just have to wait. I just have to develop the system so that people might be hooked to this. This is Facebook, but if I wanted to attack a company's backend, I could clone the company's backend and use it. In order to make it more credible, let us think that now we have this document and that you have access to publish in our profiles. Well, in Facebook. So I pick up the document, I can make it a PDF or in an email with enriched text. I can look for the IP address or the impersonated domain and I can access to the domain. We have the Facebook page that is cloned, but if you see in the upper part, we have the IP without a certificate. That's why it's very important when we browse the net. We should pay attention to those details, not to be subject to any of those attacks. In this case, I'm going to put the login window here and the password capturing on the other side. You see how easy it is. On one hand, I have the victim. I'm going to introduce a hypothetical ID, Marco Lozano in this case, on the password. If you see, now, in addition to have the information, the tool redirects the user to the real Facebook site. So the user might think that he made a mistake without introducing the ID and doing it again. And when he does it again, he will think that nothing has happened, but I would already have his or her ID. It didn't take me not even 5 minutes. And this can be extrapolated to a bigger scale and in 2 or 3 days to set an infrastructure to attack thousands of users through email. If we had a server with a certificate as Facebook, whatever certificate, we might have a more trustable domain without any alert or warning, and we could try to impersonate the squatting type, which is to try to register a domain very similar. Instead of Facebook, and I'm sorry for the pronunciation, .com, a domain which is Facebook with a different spelling, and the user may not even realize that is in an illegitimate page. Sorry, the audience is not using the microphone. It looks, it search in Google Bing and Exalit. Looks for all public information related to this domain MX, email, in order to have the information. Today, we and you as a businessman is not unusual to use ICT or to outsource ICT services. We've been doing it for many years, but what happens when we talk about cybersecurity? If the companies, you say, everything you offer is okay, the ICTs might say, and they don't want to lose you as customers, so they might say yes. They might know something, but how far do they know about cybersecurity? We, to protect our companies as self-employees, SMEs, or owners of a micro company, we should know about the conditions and cybersecurity services that are important. All agreements have to be reflected in the SLA in case they use data from our customers, users, closed information. They should be subject to a disclosure agreement. Why? If we do not have clauses for a potential loss or leak of information that is provoked by our ICT and cybersecurity provider, we will never be able to present a claim or denounce him or her because there isn't any sanction when this type of attack might happen. On many occasions, we might change our supplier either because it's more economical or is more efficient or because we know about something or somebody. But in this case, if we have an SLA or an NDA with the supplier, we should make sure that this supplier, based on the previous clause, they comply with them. If they had access to information, they should destroy this information to take the necessary measures so that this supplier can no longer access our systems or services that are published in internet. I spoke about the insiders before, but sometimes suppliers become insiders. Let us see what things should be included in a confidentiality agreement. Those are the elements that we should take into account. Data protection law, what is the question, please?
Realmente la responsabilidad.
In fact, you can think that you have a company, that you have somebody that steals the data and publish them in internet. The responsibility would be on you as the owner of the company, no matter whether somebody else has made the action. You are the ultimate responsible. Then you can make measures to show that you haven't realized the action, but you had to prove there has been a third party, whether intentionally or non-intentionally. But the law protects the users more than the entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs have to comply with the law, and users should survey for its compliance. And then the sanctioning institution, that is the agency. Since the creation of our company, we had many different agreements and contracts with suppliers and customers. Some of them were not accurate. Some other cases, they were verbal, and that was a pain that could have serious consequences. Using our deontological code based on ethical values and business responsibility, and to keep a good reputation with our suppliers and customers, we started to make all our agreements formal. We set agreements with the legal office that help us in legal matters and with the accounting that makes our payrolls. They use information that is sensitive, so we had to set confidentiality agreements and access to sensitive information. We also reach agreement with our customers, those that provide information about their investment projects, so that they could have the guarantee that we were going to protect their information respecting the confidentiality. And we as employees, we now have confidentiality agreements. Now, I will tell you some recommendations about what you should include in a confidentiality agreement based on our experience. The structure and contents of a confidentiality agreement might vary, but it usually has the following information: place and venue, parties, the reason why the agreement is set, service and confidentiality clause. Then we give information about the object of each of the parties. We should indicate the service that will be covered by the agreement. And lastly, we will cover confidentiality issues. The agreement should include a description about what information is considered confidential. For example, procedures, techniques, drawings, designs, drafts, diagrams, and models that the supplier may have to provide the service, but this catalog might depend on your company. We need to make sure we explain the confidentiality commitment. For example, acceptable use of the information, how long the duty of secrecy is in force. In the confidentiality agreement with our legal office, we indicate the following: information could only be used to provide legal service and not for commercial purposes or similar purposes. Legal office should provide information to their employees about the importance of keeping professional secrecy. Professional secrecy about our company could be kept forever, even at the termination of the service. The legal office should apply the corresponding security measures to the files according to the LOPD and RD LOPD. At the termination of the service, the legal office will give back the information or will destroy it in a secure manner. To get a good security level in our organization, we should take into account things that go beyond technical measures. And confidentiality agreement allow us to regulate service provision, improving the security of our information when it's accessed by third parties. We can regulate service provision today, and this will avoid problems in the future. Don't leave this aside. As we see, it's very important that if we're going to use data or an accounting service to make the payrolls, we need a confidentiality agreement. And as I said before, this data should be only used for a specific purpose. It can never be used for any other purpose that is not included in the agreement. We're now going to move to the security guiding plan and how it can help us protect our company. On many occasions, it's difficult for SME or a micro company to have a starting point. When we surf the net, do we need to, or we need to make our company secure? We need a certificate, information manager, things that are very interesting but might be too complex for what we need. In this case, we have smaller, simpler alternatives as PDS, where we can have the starting point to evaluate the security level so that we can implement the necessary controls to guarantee security. The first thing is to identify the security level in our company. If we don't know what do we have to protect, it will be very unlikely that we know what do we have to implement. Then we have to define the strategic objectives. Cybersecurity and business should be totally aligned. If they run in parallel, we will not be compliant with the objective of generating trust. We should take into account departments and processes affected, and then to implement good practices for the employees. At the end of the day, they will be the ones that will generate incidents or issues in the company, sometimes intentionally and some others not.
How do we implement this plan? Well, of course, this plan needs to be designed in the framework of ongoing improvement. There's no one sole way of implementing the plan. The idea is that we implement controls on the most insecure systems. We need to first carry out a diagnosis to know what the state of play is, then to define projects, initiatives to classify and prioritize cybersecurity based on what we want to protect. Then the management of the company will have to approve and adopt this master plan, and then of course implement it. One of the most important stages of the implementation of a security plan is to make sure that the plan is realistic and feasible. It's like when we organize a party, we want fireworks, we want clowns, but that's too much. We need to be very specific, and we need to make sure that our plan is realistic and can be implemented. Is the plan by itself enough? Well, of course not. It will be an important step forward in an organization, but this plan needs to be periodically reviewed and updated. Why? Well, because our processes and organization can change with time, and we need to make sure that our security strategy or policy is adapted to respond to these changes. We need to have periodic controls and follow up to ensure that we are protecting our company well. Let's imagine that a significant change has been implemented in the organization. Let's imagine that in the past we had the IT system outsourced, but a decision has been made in the company to hire somebody in-house to do the IT work. So at that point, we will have to review the entire plan, the entire cycle, the controls we've implemented, because the situation has changed. It will no longer be a company, an outsourced company who will do this, but somebody working in-house. In INCIBE and the Spanish and Cybersecurity Institute, we're aware of all the problems that companies find when they decide to implement cybersecurity. And to this end, we've created a tool that we've called the self-diagnosis tool that can be a first step to help you know the level of awareness or adaptation that is required in your company in terms of cybersecurity. Let me show you a demo, because in only 5 minutes you can analyze your company. The website address is adl.incibe.es, and through a series of very simple questions in which we will describe the services provided by our company, and after answering all those questions, we're going to receive a percentage that reflects the level of risk that our company does vis-a-vis cybersecurity. For example, what technologies does your company use? That's the number one question. Most companies tend to use emails. Let's imagine, since we're only a few in this room, let's imagine that you'll have a company, or you either run a company or work for a company. What services do your companies use? Email? What else? Websites? Do you have your own servers? Yes? Is remote work or telework allowed? Well, it's not common. Yes, it is, in my company at least. and also tablets or smartphones for work purposes. Yes. Well, we're going to answer with your answers. How do you update and keep your security systems up to date? In-house, so we outsource or subcontract an IT technician, so you'll have an in-house IT expert? Yes? Okay. Do you have a protection system in place for computers? Yes, what do you have? Tell me. Antivirus, firewalls, encryption. Sorry. You're not seeing this, sorry. Here it is. Good. Firewalls, antivirus, encryption. Next option, perhaps? Yeah? Okay. Next question. Have you trained your staff recently in cybersecurity? Yes? No? Or was it a one-off course? Or do you provide them with written documentation? We have weekly tips, so you're referring about written documents. INCIBE documents? No, apparently not. Sorry, we're not able to interpret the comments and questions from the members of the audience. Okay, you provide your employees with documents for them to read. Do you control access to the premises, cameras, logs, but you don't have security guards, I guess? No. Do you have any keyword protection policy in place in the server? And is it mandatory? Yes? Good. What do you do with the info you're no longer going to work? Do you subcontract the destruction? I'm referring to documents, paper documents. You haven't subcontracted any service, right? Do you have social media? Yes. Profiles? And who manages the account on social media? Okay. I'll choose the middle option, okay? And how much time can the company stay without having access to the email? Less than 4 hours. This, unfortunately, isn't the case. What frequency do you back up your files and emails? Daily? Daily backups? Good. What do you use, a free or a paid email service? Who creates and eliminates email accounts? I guess you have an IT technician in-house. That's what you said earlier. Okay, in-house, right? Yes. In-house IT technician. Another question. How long can your company have the website down? As little as possible, less than 4 hours. With what frequency do you do backups of your website? Monthly backups. You aren't aware of that? You don't know? Daily? Weekly. halfway between monthly and daily. This is a hybrid company, okay? Who has access to or who uploads content in the website? I guess that the internal IT technician, the in-house technician, or somebody in his team. With what frequency do you update the tools that manage web page content? I'm referring to plugins and modules whenever there are updates. Who does that? And with what frequency? Let's think about the worst case scenario, okay? Once a month, let's say. Do you believe that you are here to legislation in the field of cybersecurity? Yes? This is a question that is often controversial because they think they do, but they don't know 100% sure. They're not 100% sure that they do because legislation changes. You think it's okay, you think you don't comply. Let's say you comply with almost everything. We're being very optimistic. Usually people aren't. For how long can your company operate with the system crashed without incurring any losses? Less than 4 hours? And with what frequency do you do backups of the systems? Weekly? Weekly? We've got it connected, he's saying, but I'm afraid it's hard to hear from the booth because the mic is not being used. Do you have remote servers? Yes. Only for employees, right? With VPN? The remote desktop? Who has privileges to administer the website? I guess that the in-house IT technician. Where the service in a secured room, you have a CPD, a restricted access room. Do you have a contingency plan in case of, well, disaster? A backup CPD or a backup in the cloud services? And you've tested the plan, you do simulations to check that the plan indeed works. You say yes to everything. Because our company does cybersecurity, so... Well, but sometimes that's not the case. Okay, well defined, tested. For how long can your company operate without your employees being able to work remotely, less than 4 hours? What services do you offer? You said you're a cybersecurity company. Good, we can talk about this later. Less than 4 hours. Who does remote connections to your systems? The employees, I guess. Who authorizes internal applications to which staff members can access? Probably in-house technician, right? Is there a plan B in case the workers cannot remotely access? Have you considered this? Consider the different scenarios? Okay, cybersecurity company, so I guess that your staff are familiar with the importance of cybersecurity. Good. Fortunately for me, sorry, we haven't finished. With what frequency do you update the software of equipment and systems? So you have an in-house IT technician. I guess you've got all the updates duly implemented. And this is one of the lowest percentages I've encountered because we're few and because of the type of company you work in. But companies that wish to know their risk level will have to answer these questions. And based on the percentage obtained, a series of tips or recommendations are issued. And we then send guidelines or recommendations to mitigate risks. We have written very simple documents for companies to be able to implement safeguards, etc. Good. So you have a very clear idea regarding what cybersecurity is about. We need to start checking the workstation and making sure that cybersecurity measures are duly implemented. Post-its. It's true that now it's not that common to find post-its with credentials, but we've seen this in audits when we open up drawers or we flip the screens around. We find post-its with the credentials, and mobile phones and small devices shouldn't be left on the workstation. And all confidential info on paper needs to be stored, and you cannot bin confidential documents either. As for passwords, same applies. You need to have policies in place forcing users to change their passwords. And as we've seen earlier, passwords need to be robust. Sometimes the problem is that our employees introduce or enter their passwords in malicious sites. So we need to make sure that we have two-factor authentication mechanisms in place. We need to have secure applications. We need to use trustworthy applications instead of paid applications with cracks that can potentially infect your system. Sometimes you have a friend, for example, and we've seen this quite frequently, that says that he's going to install pirate Office, and that kind of installation can lead to malicious software. We need to be very careful with USB drives, smartphones. I'm sure you've lost USB drives or pen drives. Sometimes what happens is that in pen drives we have confidential data, so whoever finds them can access your personal data, and that can translate into, theft of info, filtration of info, and that can translate into, of course, damage to our companies. We need to make sure that our customers' info is safe. We need to first classify the type of information we manage. We have three types: confidential, public, and in-house. And confidential, as established by law, will have to be stored in a specific manner. In-house information refers to information that is intended to the internal use of the company, and then we have the corporate information, and we need to see how and where that information is stored, because depending on the type of information, it will have to be stored differently. Confidential data needs to be stored in a space with restricted access in an encrypted manner as well. How are we going to distribute or disseminate that information? We will have to see how we're going to control access or restrict access, and how we're going to use that information. On the one hand, through audits or by auditing access to know where it is, who accesses it, and what use is made, whether it's modified or eliminated or erased. And if we encrypt it, we're going to attach or provide yet another layer of security. Since May the 25th of last year, the Personal Information Act that was passed in Spain obliged companies to encrypt data. And of course, we need to make sure that documents, physical documents, are destroyed in a safe manner. There are some companies that destroy documents in a professional way, and there are also applications to help destroy virtual documents. The different measures can be implemented on hard drives in order to eliminate files. Personal data protection. If we manage data from our customers and clients, it's very important that we comply with the LOPD. The Spanish Agency for Data Protection defines how we need to implement protection and how we need to comply with the legislation in force, in this case the LOPD. Let me begin by talking about LOPD. When we ask data to users, and by the way, my son and my wife just entered the room, when they, of course, letter of consent needs to be signed. And we cannot store data that we're not going to use. And we need to inform users on how they can exercise their right to access, modify, cancel, and challenge their data. And we need to adopt the measures established by the Spanish agency to ensure good protection of data. Sometimes we view this compliance with LOPD as a threat, because of course non-compliance can be translated into fines or penalties. However, if we adhere to this LOPD, we will generate trust among our customers. This is like the confidence labels given to websites. This is going to translate into further trust on behalf of our customers. What happens when we work remotely, when we work from home? Well, we see that this is more and more common to foster the work-life balance, and telework is more frequent these days. However, when working from home, we need to make sure that our computers are protected and not infected, because if we access through an infected equipment, we will be compromising the security of our company's equipment. In the case of mobile devices, something similar to desktop computers happens. If we have different smartphones, or let's say of big number of mobiles, and the company would be interested to have a specific software. If we are working using our personal computers, we would need to verify and check first that there are no vulnerabilities, and use them with accounts with limited privileges. How many of you use personal computers with privileges without having the administrators home, so to say? I'm referring when you're home. I'm referring to the computer you use, your personal computer. With what kind of account do you use your personal computer? Well done. That's the way to go. How about you? Well, with the administrator. That's quite common, I must say. So it's very important to restrict or limit the use of administrator accounts, because if we compromise the administrator's account, we will compromise absolutely everything. We're very much aware about this, these threats. We protect ourselves. We sometimes hire an insurance policy, but the problem is that when we are subject to attacks, we are not as protected as we expected. We have a company that works in the field of cybersecurity represented in this room. What can we do when these situations occur? Well, there's the first option, which is to pray. But if we haven't implemented technological measures, well, praying will not be enough. My grandma used to pray to Saint Anthony whenever she lost someone, lost something. But if we haven't implemented any protective measures, I'm afraid we're in trouble. So if Plan A hasn't worked out, we'll probably have a Plan B, a backup copy. Backups are very important, but something is even more important, which is to make sure that backups can be restored. Because many times what we see is that those checks aren't done, and when we want to restore the backups, we realize, sadly, that they can't be restored because the files are corrupt and therefore cannot be adequately restored. It's very important to have a contingency plan in place. I'm not only referring to backups. That's not the only measure. That's only part of the contingency plan. Contingency plan needs to envisage other risks of flooding, fires, just to mention two examples, so that when these threats occur, we can start protecting ourselves as soon as possible. In order to design a contingency plan, the first thing we need to do is to identify risks. We're basically talking about how we can assess those risks, and this is very simple to do. It's a formula to measure the impact in euros and multiply this by the likeliness of occurrence. And applying this simple formula, we can identify risk. For example, a server connected directly to the power current. Maybe we have electricity or cuts from time to time. So in that case, we would have to have a UPS between the plug and the server to make sure that all those processes that are being executed can be duly completed in the event of a power cut. Then we have another option, which is to outsource risk, so to say. Maybe implementation by our behalf would be overly complex or overly costly, or because we decide to transfer the responsibility to a third party. In this case, it's quite common in Spain, and in the United States they've been doing this for more than 20 years, but this is a possibility now in Spain. And basically, what they're doing is hiring LOPD audits and website audits. So, in summary, if we offer cybersecurity, our award is the customer's trust and confidence in us as a company. How can INCIBE, the Spanish Cybersecurity Institute, help us? All the services we provide are free of charge. So let me summarize them. We have the awareness kit that includes an implementation manual that basically describes main tips. We have a quarterly tips. We have brochures. We have speared or targeted attack. Then we have the self or auto diagnosis tool that I've shared with you earlier. We have 19 security policies that are very easy to implement in a company, that go from the management, passwords, Wi-Fi connection, remote access, uploading files in the cloud. Then we have the MOOC for companies and self-employed. Every 3 or 4 months, we organize a course that lasts between a month and a half. Then we have the interactive virtual courses that can help us understand all the intricacies of cybersecurity, and we cover all the different sectors: industrial sector, health sector, etc. Then we have a serious game or a video game. It's a video game that can teach people everything that has to be known about cybersecurity. Then we have one-stop shop, a single point of contact that companies can access in case they have doubts and queries regarding cybersecurity. And then we have an interesting catalog for you, a cybersecurity catalog, where we include all the companies so that they are part of our almost 5,000 and something services and solutions that we offer at INCIBE. And all the info can be found in the Protege tu Empresa, Protect Your Company section in the INCIBE website. We also have security newsletters that we send to SMEs. We have a blog service with the latest news. And that's it. Any questions at this point? Probably not. And what about you, gentlemen? Any questions? Come on. I have jotted down 3 questions. Can we receive templates of non-disclosure agreements and then modify them? Well, some years ago, when we were called Sindeco instead of INCIBE, we had this section called Technology Contracts. And we had some templates for non-disclosure agreements, but we no longer offer this service because these agreements change with time, and we cannot ensure that those agreements adhere to the legislation in force. We as SMEs or micro companies, we're constantly seeing vulnerabilities and attacks, multinationals and governments that are being attacked. And we, as small companies, have more limited resources. What can we do to be minimally protected, to be able to convey trust and confidence to our customers? Is this possible with limited resources? Yes, indeed, it is. You need to understand that first you need to raise awareness among the staff in your company, provide them with info regarding the threats that exist, the risks, how they can be detected. First, awareness raising among employees. Second, since you have people that work in-house as IT technicians, you need to provide them with technical information regarding cybersecurity so that they're updated regarding all existing vulnerabilities that affect the systems that are part of your company's inventory. So depending on your technological dependence, this is quite easy to do. And last, if, for example, government or the governments are going to spy through vulnerabilities, well, of course, we cannot protect ourselves from that. Nobody will be able to do so. But any action, I was referring to multinationals or big corporations that have huge resources and that in spite of their resources are attacked. We as small companies have very limited resources, so what can we do to protect ourselves? Well, your technological dependence is small in terms of devices. If you have 3 servers, you're not going to spend 25,000 euros in security. Maybe that's not feasible. So perhaps in your case, you need to make sure to upload the contents of your server in the cloud and to outsource the risk to, let's say, Amazon or Google, and trust, in this case, Amazon, for example. And last, based on your experience at INCIBE, what percentage of vulnerabilities and attacks that you were aware of? What percentage it represents the attacks from within and from outside? So you're referring to insider attacks versus outsider attacks? Well, let me try to give you a figure. 99% are outside or external attacks and 1% are insider attacks. Well, the attacks carried out from the outside are constant, ongoing. But information filtration, attacks, or perhaps a developer in the company developing something. Well, that's something that can happen, but those attacks aren't as common as external attacks, because we see that there are botnets that are constantly automating attacks. It's an ongoing process, I'm afraid. And that's it. It's been an intimate presentation. Thank you very much, and I hope